Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Associate Editor Gemma Cray.
And I'm Editor Stephen Galvin. And today we present a very special podcast supported by Greene Ireland and in partnership with Windmill Lane, Ireland's leading picture and sound post-production, VFX and content creation studio.
We are delighted to welcome Richard Baneham, the two-time Academy Award-winning VFX supervisor, executive producer and second unit director on the Avatar sequels.
And Richard is chatting to Abby Greene. Abby graduated from IADT with a BSc in Creative Media Technologies in 2020. After college, she started in VFX, working on set with Disney and Universal before joining Windmill Lane.
Obviously, we're here to chat about your career. I know, obviously, you've won, the 2 Oscars. You're very much established in the industry and stuff. But, can you tell us a little bit about, how you got into VFX animation? I know you went to Ballyfermot and stuff to study there, but did you kind of know beforehand that you wanted to do this?
Well, I think one of those things where there should be no distinction between visual effects animation and animation, as in traditional or 2D animation is a slightly different scale, but one sort of leads to the other. Good animations, I can teach a good animator a computer pretty quickly. It's hard to teach somebody who understands the sort of the DCCP of it, the digital content creation package, to see motion and see animation and see performance. So that's harder. It's not that it can't be done. It's just it comes from a different place. So for me, animation is animation, and animation is choices for your character, choices to replicate what the actor's intention is during the read, or when you're bringing a creature to life, describing a vocabulary that lets you understand the sort of biokinematics, the internal mechanism of that creature and make it believable. So that's but that doesn't answer your question, or ask. I guess it does, but it does it in a roundabout way. I got into it basically with 2D animation first. Obviously, the Ballyfermot was a big part of it. I ended up coming out to the States doing a couple of movies here. Ended up at Warner Brothers, and Warner's was an interesting one. It was a sort of a want and willingness to compete with what Disney was doing, and there was a great attitude. And I think when Brad Bird came on to do Iron Giant, that for me was a game changer. A very like-minded filmmaker, somebody who really wanted to get into the sort of the character of the piece and the idiosyncrasies of the characters, and bring them to life in a unique way. I think Brad has that in spades, and you can see it with his other movies. And the Incredibles is I think indicative of it. We 2D then leads to sort of and Iron Giant was an opportunity to do 2D and 3D, and both essentially for me was just that was animation. I mean, I don't think of it, or didn't think of it as anything different because it was on a computer or a pencil. So I think from there, then obviously there's the jump to live action. That was a little different. It was that happened because of a movie called Cats and Dogs. We'd finished up Iron Giant, and Warner's were looking to make a integrated live action, and originally it was a puppeteered dog with a CG face, babe-like in some ways, and there were some shots in it like that. But I did a quick test of a fully CG beagle, and even though the render quality wasn't great, you could sell the idea that if you could make them move like it was real, you could, and even though it wasn't rendered in any way photorealistically, you can make people go, "Oh, hang on, is that a real dog?" So, and that's we had a little bit of success with that, and I switched over and became the soup. After doing that test, they offered me an opportunity to switch to live action and take over that. And then on that one, I ended up meeting Eileen Moran. Actually, it was one of the people who was on that show at one point, and I ended up doing a couple more movies. I did another movie with her actually later on, Scooby-Doo, but maybe I have the timeline wrong here, Abby. Maybe it's the other way around. Either way, but that leads to Lord of the Rings being, they were making the change down in New Zealand. They were moving on to try really establish Gollum as a character, and I got a call to see if I was interested. And at the time, we talked about The Incredibles already. I had to make a decision as to whether to go to San Francisco or New Zealand. We had a couple of opportunities actually. It was a company called Escape as well that were doing The Matrix 2 and 3, and that was an opportunity. So it was a bit of a toss up, but only when The Incredibles came out was
that would have been a good one to be on.
I would have liked to be on that one. And Brad's again a great guy. There were a couple of other guys that went up at the time, but I think ultimately we made the maybe the right choice, going down and
no, it's such a big name, and especially with the whole trilogy and everything like that,
It was an opportunity to do something different as well,
Yeah, definitely. And I know that you just kind of mentioned there about Scooby-Doo, the live action, and I've seen as well that maybe afterwards you did Narnia, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Is that correct?
Well, that was again similarly. That was Andrew Adamson, who again a Kiwi director. Andrew's a great guy as well. We were just talking to him recently, actually. So he's back in the fray. I think he's about to make another movie. So, but long story short, we did a test when we were in between Return of the King. No, we're between Two Towers and Return of the King. I think, or maybe it was after Return of the King. We did a test for Mr. Beaver, and for Lion Witch, and we had done a pretty nice job with it, I would say. And Andrew had asked if I wasn't going back to New Zealand, if I were interested in taking over the animation for that one, wherever it landed. And we ended up in Rhythm and Hughes for a portion of Narnia. And again, Scooby-Doo was on there. Bill Cryer was the soup at Rhythm back then, and I'd worked with Bill on what was it, Quest for Camelot. So it just shows you it's an incestuous industry. Actually, the very first weekend I moved to LA, I went to an animation expo, and that'll tell you how how things had changed. At the time, it was hard to get a job in animation, and then there was all of a sudden these animation fairs. That would have been in '94, and I literally ran into a guy called Dave Boudreau who was looking at my portfolio. I'm like an idiot with big A1 folder, in A2 actually, and A1 pages inside folded out. It just was very unusual to come from a more traditional art background for animation. So, but the lad did actually catch a look at my stuff and said, "Hey, you should meet Bill." And we went over. He'd just finished Ferngully at the time, so and he was very, very good. And we ended up hanging out and became friends. Bill was a very, very good guy in the industry, I think. And he ended up being Bill ended up being the Academy governor for animation for a couple of years, and he has since retired. But himself and Sue, great influence on the industry. Just a legacy of leaving good experiences with good people and encouraging great animators.
That's what you want, really,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just a quick question about the Narnia one. So, obviously, working on that as like the animation supervisor, what maybe was the most challenging character to create?
Well, Aslan, obviously, but there's a couple of things, right? And it's probably the most challenging thing in visual effects that I've ever had to think through, which is adapting human physiognomy to the structure of a lion, and obviously having done Cats and Dogs, I used to do it where I spent some time in London. The mill did a lot of the stuff for us. And so what I did is I would do 2D drawovers of frames with phonemes, and then suggested how we would take the physiognomy and augment it in the structure of the dog, which obviously is an extended muzzle. Aslan had to be a little more elegant, a little more majestic, and so we couldn't live in yappy kind of phonemes. So trying to figure out how to make the face work and to keep the breadth of the character. But the hardest challenge actually for that was we didn't have a voice at the time. And again, it was Andrew was rocking a hard place. He had a very specific cast in mind. I believe he wanted Liam Neeson from the start, although I had done some tests for Brian Cox. And then the studio we're talking about Russell Crowe. So Russell Crowe was in the running, or the studio wanted him, but the idea became, well, we hadn't gotten the voice, but we had evolved the character with pressure for production to turn over shots. And it was like, well, some genius on the production side said, well, all of these shots have no dialogue. And of course, those shots were probably the most emotionally important, and it goes all the way through his sacrifice and his death. But the shots where you have to impart emotionally heavy narrative through and essentially an inner monologue. That's to say, a performance without talking. What is the character thinking? What is he feeling? Or to be asked to do those ones first without the voice was a really, really hard thing to do. So I went to Andrew and I said to him, all right, what are we going to do? Who is it? Give me the voice, or give me who you think is going to win, and I'll animate those shots with that in mind. And Andrew's response was, well, who would you cast? And I'm like, given the choice of anyone? He's like, yeah, dead or alive, who would you cast? I was like, Atticus Finch, like Gregory Peck, all day. And it's like, so we did in fact build the physiognomy based on Gregory Peck. And then when it became Liam Neeson, it was much easier. It was a much easier adaptation because he was much closer to Gregory. But whereas Russell Crowe would have been a very, very different approach, kind of very different, I think, face shapes in general. So I think that was probably the hardest thing to do, which was to animate a character without knowing the true voice representation of the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally. Like you can kind of see like how not having that audio in there, the voice can kind of it could be anything then,
And these are all the sacrifice scenes and the death scenes and the stern looks and the the judging. Again, text, subtext, and inner monologue is something I often talk about with young animators. 90% of what we say is not text. That makes up maybe 10%. The subtext is what makes up what we're saying. But what we're actually in performance, what we're seeing and feeling, thinking, is inner monologue, and that's makes up at least 50% of the performance, probably more. But so what you say is 10%, maybe 5%, and the other 95% is made up of subtext and inner monologue. So that's something that to keep in mind for young animators as you're breaking down a character and trying to break down a scene.
Definitely. And now, like, kind of going back with Scooby-Doo and stuff, like that was a movie that I kind of watched when I was a kid and all that kind of stuff. Did you work on that iconic scene where they're getting all the airplane? When Scooby-Doo's all dressed up in the
Scooby-Doo's that was an interesting movie in general. A guy called Raja Goosen was directed, and he had written a version of the script that was much more adult. It was a nostalgic look at what Scooby-Doo really was. I have to be careful because I don't know if this has ever been made public in any way, but it was a very, very adult version of that movie. And again, we got pretty close to the end of the movie, when we did a screening with the studio, and there was a little bit of panic, and it was brand protection, and it was the right thing to do for the studio. but which was to say, hey, again, that's not Scooby-Doo. Shaggy was a drug dealer. Velma had a hankering for Daphne. Is that it was a very different approach. So
Definitely
um,
more
so yeah,
rating.
so it ended up being tamed down. We had to add a piece of cloth, a digital piece of cloth to Sarah Michelle Gellar's outfit because it was very low cut for a reason because Freddie had ended up in our body. And that was the sort of joke of it, which is that he was obsessed with his own body because that was his girlfriend. But so it did take an odd turn, and then we had to go through a very quick correction and pull it back to something that was more PG.
So did you guys have, like, you guys obviously went through the whole production, did the film, kind of realized, oh shit, we need to go back a bit
Well,
here?
we didn't realize. No, that's that again. The studio had a change of heart or a crisis of confidence, maybe. But on the VFX side, we had to make some changes. Even down to the monster characters, the bad guys in it. They went from being scary to slightly goofy and funny. So we had to redo some of the animation with a different tone in mind.
In more of a classic Scooby-Doo kind of way, I guess.
Very much a classic. Exactly. Go back to brand.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. I actually had no idea about
No one does.
about that. A little bit of insider news there anyway. So obviously, Avatar, like, you've gotten, great success from working on the two films there. Was there ever a point, like, now it doesn't have to be like, necessarily like winning two Oscars, obviously that's a huge thing, but like, was there ever a point in your career where you're kind of going like, oh Jesus, I've actually made it? Or are you still kind of trying to reach, climbing
I
higher?
don't know. I think, look, one of the nicest compliments is and again, it's lovely. Look, it's lovely to win awards. They are, particularly if they're awarded to you from your peers, but it doesn't really mean anything. The work is what counts. It's what you stand up, and it's hopefully it's how you influence the next generation of kids filmmakers coming through. But it's lovely when you have somebody come up to you, and I've had this happen a good number of times where there was a lad, I think, I'm trying to think, they might own, the lad that owns Giant Studio in Dublin, had said it, that he was contemplating leaving animation school, and I happened to be one of the years I was home and was able to spend a little time and give a talk. And he was like, well, look, I didn't, I ended up sticking around because of your talk. And then I had the very good pleasure of giving them an award at the Galway Film Festival. When they'd won, so it was really, really nice. But I've had a couple of them along the way where people have come up to me and they're quality animators and say, I only got into the industry or only stayed in the industry because I was at a lecture or had time to hang out on set and see you work. So that to me is quite the compliment.
More so the helping others and kind of guiding them rather than the things that maybe,
Yeah, well, it's more about inspiring, keeping the next generation, sort of, open to the idea that this is something they can do, and that they have a unique voice to bring and a unique sort of take on things that hopefully can actually influence, popular culture. And then you're talking to kids, not unlike yourself, 20 years later, and say, "Oh, I remember Scooby-Doo," or "I was a big fan of Iron Giant," or and they hold something dear in their childhood, for what we did, which is really nice.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, those are, like, especially kind of when you're that young and stuff, these things definitely do kind of
Yeah.
make an impact or an imprint on yourself, So kind of touching on you kind of chatting there about like liking, being able to help people starting off in the industry and that kind of thing. What qualities or skills do you think like really make someone stand out or like kind of show, oh, this person's gonna make it or maybe do well, say?
Look, there's two qualities. Obviously, talent is a great thing to have, but tenacity, I would, in a lot of hires, I would take tenacity over talent. The want and willingness to be there, the want to do the work again, because it's easy to look at it from the outside and think, you draw for a living, or you animate for a living, or in this case, we have a lab up that has. We're looking for generalists, people who are able to learn to do, all of it, effects, build out scenes, understand. We're trying to treat people as filmmakers and teach them to look at it as a scene and how it would shoot, like what's the side of the line, what kind of lenses would you be on, like get people really involved and thinking. I think that's really when I look at that group of kids that we are hiring, we're just looking for people who really want to invest, who will do this for the love of it. Don't get me wrong, everybody has to be paid and you have to make a living, but this kind of aspirational idea of climbing a ladder, which seems to have kicked in the last 20 odd years, that I need to do this step, that is, it's not that it's not a ladder. It isn't a ladder. It's about growth. It's about understanding, sort of your skill set and growing as an artist and having the ability to impart an idea, and influence the process. Like that is a skill that I would look for. People who have a want and willingness to be here and contribute. That everything. And I talk about every single scene. Find the truth. I don't give a rat's if you're being asked to do a piece of work that doesn't seem important. Like I had a guy, I think it was on Cats and Dogs, an animator who we were assigning shots, and it was a newspaper. Kid throws a newspaper. Newspaper, rattles off and lands in the frame, and he's like, I'm above that. I'm like, he's like, oh, I was like it's because it's just a newspaper. I'm like, well, all right, like, tell me what kind of edition it is, how heavy it is, what the bounce is. Make it interesting. Sell me a story that makes the shot work, for the reason that yes, it is exposition, and it had to just be sort of in the movie to say there's a newspaper lands on the doorstep and the guy picks it up, but make it fucking interesting. Again, put a little effort in. It shouldn't be, humdrum, I'm pushing buttons or I tick boxes. It has to be contribution. How can I make it interesting? How can I make it better? And again, that's a silly example, but it's about the idea that you want to be there. You want to contribute. You want to make it the best it can be on every single shot and every single frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Like even if it is maybe the smaller shots to the quote unquote like less important ones and stuff, like they're still kind of a part of the whole story.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And you can find great idiosyncrasies in them, and you can find really interesting ways to make it work. I remember working on Iron Giant, and I had a scene where the FBI agent, and it was, I can't even remember what the scene was offhand, but he was delivering a piece of dialogue, but I had him fix his tie and and play with his lapels and straighten himself up and speak to character, how who he thought he was and how much better he thought he was than the people he was staying with. And the preening, the peacocking, it's just a silly thing. But we had to deliver essentially. I should look back at the movie, and I can't remember what the dialogue line was, but the small idiosyncrasies of him preening it speaks to character. And you could have just done that line talking to the Annie, to the Jennifer Aniston character, just straight. You just stand there and give the line, and it probably would have been fine. But that kind of stuff where you can layer it, again, triggers a relationship with Brad from the get-go, which is he's like, oh man, I love the detail. I love how it evolves the character. So that's the thing. You can find detail in all of it.
I know I kind of touched a little bit on like maybe one of your like proudest moments in your career, maybe where you kind of realized like, oh, I've made it. So, but Was there a specific scene, say, or character or anything like that that kind of has a bit more of a personal meaning to yourself?
Yeah, I think there's like breakthroughs are always interesting. On Orange Hind, I did a scene where the hand breaks away, and basically made that into its own character. And what I'd done originally was taking a piece of, America's Funniest Home Video had a Great Dane puppy in a kitchen, losing its mind, jumping around, and the family was going crazy. But the puppy's thinking it's having fun, and it was destroying the place. So I did the same idea with again, took that and adopted it, and made the hand a essentially a Great Dane puppy. Um, Brad was very, very enthusiastic about it, and ended up I did a good portion of that. I actually did that scene, that whole scene. But what was interesting is trying to find a way to make the 2D and 3D when we were talking about imparted forces, when one character affects another. Trying to figure out how to make them work. What I ended up doing was taking a peg bar, hanging it upside down on an old RCT monitor, and taking acetate and teaching myself to flip backwards. And then I drew in Chinograph while I could see through and look at the computer and look at each of the characters, the CG character, and then drew Hogarth on the acetate. Then took the acetate and then the gestural drawings, put it onto that paper in blue pencil, and then obviously harden the line up, and sure enough, they connected. And so that was a low tech trick to answer to a high tech problem, but it worked. And that I think for me was a proper breakthrough. That was one that was like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
I had something a little
Sometimes
different.
just go back to the
Um,
basics. It's just, the simpler kind of,
yeah,
there's no point in kind of thinking, oh, like we could do this, and whatever. It's sometimes just being like, actually, we just do this and this. It's actually grand.
well, but yeah, again, it's having again the low tech answer, because we did a lot of outputs and registrations of digital images to align things, which is how we ended up solving it on Space Jam, because it was live action scenes that were heavily integrated, but that process wasn't part of the integration that we had between 2 and 3D, 3D and live action, 2D and live action had a slightly different budget and time allowance. Yeah, but I think the other thing then would be Neytiri. There's a scene in movie one when she realizes Jake has betrayed her. Scene 182. It's strange what you remember. But the night that we had seen Zoe perform that on stage, I shit you not, I had hair on the back of my arms stood up. She was so in it and so connected to the work. And I'd literally I'd said it to her, oh my God, that's feck yeah. Anyway, that's going to be very hard to live up to and bring to screen. So that was there was pressure there. And then by the time we'd worked that scene through animation and gotten the facial rig, we were working with the lads at Weta, and it was 100% for me a proper breakthrough. Finding the presence, the soul, the sense of a real character who had empathy and sympathy, and and just ran the gamut of emotion internally. The process of her, figuring out, that he had betrayed her without saying it. That was a really, really hard scene, hard fought for, and I think in a lot of ways was one of the reasons that we were able to go on and make the movies successfully. I mean, all the way through to that sort of line of thinking and as to how to solve the facial and bring the character to life. It was a proper breakthrough, I think. So that was a big one.
Brilliant. And I know, like, obviously, like, Weta is such a big has such a big name to it and everything, like obviously doing all the Avatar movies and stuff. And I didn't, but I would worked on Cocaine Bear 3 summers ago now, I think. And they had used Weta as well for making the Cocaine Bear.
Well, look, Weta is a vendor, a gun for hire, and they can't control the content. They can only control the execution of the work, and that they do very, very well. Cocaine Bear, I can't speak to. It's like I do actually. There was one Irish lad when it was. I think his wife was on the makeup. We ran into him here in LA on that movie. They were said they had great fun. So
Yeah,
it was supposed to be a laugh to shoot, but Weta have been a great partner. You know, I was the head of animation, obviously down there for before I came on here, and that was a good way for us to build a relationship. Joe Lettieri, and the guys down at the studio, Eric Sandin being one of them, and Dan Barrett. They're just great people. You know, it's like, again, people who are in it for the want and willingness to make a project better. You know, every single shot, every single frame, you're in the trenches with people who want to make it work, and that makes it terribly easy.
Obviously, like, you've worked on so many different things now. Is there any kind of like maybe a project or an idea or something that you'd like to maybe potentially work on in the future? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's nothing out there right now. There's a good that makes me want to go. I'd love to be on that show. But there's certainly stylistically a types of movies. Actually, I saw the I think it was the second one of Spider-Man, the Spider-Verse.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you get, but the first one, I think aspirationally, there's some great stuff in there. You know, stylistically, there's some great stuff in there. So I think there's a lot of room, for movies to be done in interesting and unusual styles. I think there's an appetite for it. Arcane is a good example of something that's interesting. I that's not something I would necessarily want to have work on, but I think, but the idea of working in an unusual style is very appealing.
Yeah, I feel like that Arcane and Into the Spider-Verse, like, obviously they're both very different, but they're different to what is out there at the moment.
Well, yeah, I think there's a freedom of expression on the artistic side that's unique, in the sense that not every scene, every shot has to fit the same style. It's adopting, the styles of not just rendering, but of choices of movement, choices of everything to tell the story, and having that kind of freedom where you're not slaved to a particular vocabulary. Is it really interesting, and opens up all sorts of doors. We had a couple of opportunities. There was one scene on movie one, and there'll be a scene in movie three that touch on slightly augmented views into how we perceive the world as people. In movie one, Jake did essentially an ayahuasca trip, to become Ometakaya, but. And one of the scenes that we didn't do, and I think it might be on the DVD somewhere, one of the extended DVDs, was an exploration into his vision, what it was like for him to be completely stoned. Yeah, and that was interesting. So a lot of fractal imagery and really interesting sort of exploration, which I quite like doing. That was really, and like I said, movie three has some interesting pieces coming.
Yeah, I'm sure, like myself, I'm sure everybody is very, very excited for that to come out.
Yeah. We'll see. We have to push a big hill up, a big stone uphill, but we're getting there.
Nice. And kind of like touching on that actually a little bit, like obviously working on these projects like Avatar there, or Lord of the Rings or anything, like there's such long productions, starting from pre-production, production, and into post as well. Like how do you keep your kind of creative levels or your kind of like energy up on these long projects?
Well, I think that's just that's an attitude of wanting to again wanting to take it to fruition, you know, because we technically really don't do a pro and post. We do it all at once, and it's all intermixed. There's different stages in the pipe, capture, shot creation, that we do capture, edit, essentially these what you would call camera files or moments in time, which is a combination of the appropriate performances to tell the story, and then shot creation, and then shot creation in turn turns over to turnover to Weta, and then there's the post side of it taking it to fruition. But I find all of them interesting. I love the creative process. It's just again, getting to come to work every day and just and create is a really, really nice and unique thing that we all have to value. It's one of those things where I don't care, what it is, so long as you feel like you're actively contributing, you can find that the creative process can have real, I think, real pleasure. Yes, the days are long and hard, and there's pressure, but who gives a rat's? You get to do something that most people don't get to do.
It's such a different world as well, say for compared to maybe someone working in an office 9 to 5 kind of thing, maybe, doing completely different. It is such a different world. Like I remember the first time I went on set, like I had like stars in my eyes, because I was just like, holy shit, like it's such a different world. And it's like a little, like, I don't know how to explain it, but like kind of like a little ant farm or a bee farm. It's like everybody has their different roles.
A microcosm of society.
Yeah, 100%.
There's a hierarchical structure, and everybody has to do their job for the day to go well.
Yep.
And we're all dependent on each other. That is the long and short of it.
Yeah, it's nice that almost like, by the end when you're having a wrap party, it's like a little family. And
it is a family. That 100%. I get it, and I think there's that sense of being in it together. You're in the trenches. There's making films. Are small little wars in and of themselves. You have to. You have to defeat the production process and get it done.
And kind of you had mentioned there, like obviously, like working on set or any of the production side of things, they're long hours. What if you were to say you're the guy in charge of like how everything is like run overall, like in the world, like would there be anything about the industry or that you might change, say?
Hang on, if I got to rule the world, is that was the question?
Or rule the whole
production universe? The film industry in general. I've spent probably 20, 25 years, actually 25, maybe 30 years, trying to break down the door and kick down the walls of the client-vendor relationship, or even internally within a studio. When I was at Weta, trying to, the idea that there's discrete departments within motion, or, like we had motion edit and animation. For me, we're all contributing to the same thing. Pull everybody together and talk to everybody as filmmakers. The understanding of what your job, your part of the process, and how it affects the next step, and what can you do to help you sort of inform and not just educate, sort of, across lines, which makes things easier if you understand what the next, artist has to do. It gets easier, but also the client-vendor relationship again is an interesting one where, sort of a vendor is only successful if a client's successful, and a client's only successful if the vendor's successful. So, identifying your vendor early would be a big one for me, which studios, I think, and productions don't necessarily do very well, or rarely do. And because the earlier you identify the vendor, and again, yes, there's a leading cost, but now you have somebody who's fully integrated into the process, and you can value sort of the previs of it. Again, because we do what's called viz, but previs, in a standard relationship on the effect side, can be really valued downstream. And if you can find a way to take what your artists on the previs side is doing, and run it all the way through the pipe and treat them as a collaborator. That is for me what I would change in the attitude is like that. Obviously there has to be fiscal responsibility and producers have a job to do, but the idea of a front end spend to save you cost on the back end, because let me tell you, making changes and making adjustments and trying to fix things on the back end is no way to make film. But unfortunately, it is the most common way to make film. So it's that I would implement immediately. You're not allowed to start a VFX movie till you have your vendor.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Obviously growing up in Dublin and being surrounded by like the Irish culture and like obviously the storytelling traditions, Irish people were very good at, telling us a good story. Did you ever find that kind of helped you?
Honestly, I think in a lot of ways it was like having a second passport. It really has been I'd like to think it would have happened anyway because of charisma, but doors opened here very well for us early, and I think the open armed welcome that we received, and the sort of based on being Irish, people do sort of accept you into social circles very quickly, and that makes being away from home very easy. When you can jump in and connect with people. And again, it can quite often be at a cultural level, the ability to want to hang out without an agenda, I think is very sort of common in Dublin and not common, and not necessarily common through the rest of the world. It's like, that's just, you could, I'm sure you've done it yourself. You can sit with, kids who are coming up and people who've been in the industry for years, and by the time you're all on the second drink, it all washes away. You're just hanging out, you're just telling stories. And I think that's something that you want to hang on to.
Nice. So this is kind of a question that, well, I don't know, my granddad always loves to tell me about the very first cinema that he ever went to. What, like, obviously you're in the industry, what was the first cinema that you actually went to in Dublin, or it could be maybe somewhere else?
First movie or first cinema?
Cinema and movie. Let's go with that.
Oh, okay. Well,
first movie theater.
I can't actually remember what the movie was. I remember. I mean, I can. He was a lad with a big beard, and it was a movie about animals. So I should really know the name, but that was at the Classic Cinema in the KCR.
That's not there anymore, is it?
I don't believe it is. But what I did see at the Classic probably the year after, or maybe it was on Abbey Street. I'd seen The Black Cauldron, actually, which is not a great Disney movie. But at the time I was completely infatuated with it, with the idea of being able to draw for a living, and it's sort of, I think in some ways when I started to really pick up a pencil and do it properly.
It really started young for yourself then.
Well, I could, yeah, I could draw, you know what I mean, and using art as a way to express is can be really interesting and fun, and I think that even before I went to college, I loved to draw. I'd say, since I think I won the the community games for arts when I was a kid. I ended up on Young Lion. I don't know, that's a TV show that was on RTE when we were kids. It was called the Creative Arts program. I ended up making models from marzipan for confection. And I was probably 11 years old, and we had done it, and there was a news crew wandering around, and they're like, "Oh, there's a kid who could do it straight away," and I ended up on TV.
No way. Starting the career early.
Yeah. But again, it was just a want and willingness to participate in the arts. And it's like, for me, like even though there was when there's a crowd around, or when that's once you're in it, once you're creating it, it all kind of just falls away,
All goes away, yeah.
So it's just I just always liked the creation process.
No, it's always good to know kind of what you want to do, because especially like, well, I'm sure like, nowadays, back then as well, like, it's hard to know what you want to be doing when you're
it is 100% hard to know what you want to do, but even when you do know what you'd like to do, in Dublin back, in the 80s, there wasn't really an outlet. That was also hard fought for. You guys are in a unique position now in Dublin where the industry's healthy and moving forward. That really wasn't the case. Bluth had come to town and was the only game, and really that would have anything substantial, and they fell on hard times pretty quickly in Dublin and went away. So the Brown Bag, Jam Media, Cartoon Saloon, Cavalier, that all is spurred from essentially a small group of guys and girls who happened to be in an industry or wanting to get into an industry at a time that just didn't exist in Dublin, so they made it happen, so hats off to all of them.
Yeah, no, definitely fair play to them, because I definitely wouldn't be here without them,
Yeah, well, again, yeah. Make sure you say it next time you have an appointment with them.
Exactly. Kind of touching back on maybe like a little bit of advice and stuff to people starting off, but like if you could sit down with a younger version of yourself back, when you were starting out in Dublin, what advice would you give to a version of Richie, a younger Richie, about the journey ahead?
Well, look, honestly, there would be no way to even predict that we would be here. But what I would say is, the single best thing I could have given myself, and it was a piece of advice that my mom really gave to me. I'd like it to say follow through with it, which is, to pursue it, to chase it every minute. Like, get in with an honest, sort of approach to the arts, and good, bad, or indifferent, whether you make it, which is kind of a bullshit way to say be successful. It's like, again, and it's like success is about finding happiness, finding your groove, finding something a group that you want to be around, and things you want to contribute to. The rest of it, it really doesn't mean anything. And it's like, it's just, chase honest work, chase work that you think will, and again, I've been lucky, I've been lucky. The right things came along at the right time, and I think we made a lot of the right choices. And look, don't look back, only look forward. Regret doesn't have any, real benefit. Can you learn from mistakes? Yes, of course. But look forward, and just keep driving it forward. That's all you can do.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you very much for answering all my questions.
Abby, enjoy.
Okay, thanks so much.
I'll talk to you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. This podcast has been made possible with the support of Screen Ireland.
So make sure to visit filmireland.ie, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and find out more about what's going on in Irish cinema and never miss another podcast.